So last week, Pastor David, he talked about exposing what is hidden and seeing the heart transformed. And so I want to read a verse this morning that kind of carries on from that and then continue forward with what we're going to say this morning. So we're going to start in Ephesians chapter 5, verse 11. So if you have your Bibles, you can turn there. Ephesians chapter 5, verse 11. And here it starts. We're going to go through to somewhere 21, 19 or 21. It says, "Take no part in the unfruitful works of darkness, but instead expose them. For it is shameful to even speak of the things that they do in secret. But when anything is exposed by the light, it becomes visible. For anything that becomes visible is light. Therefore it says, 'Awake, O sleeper, arise from the dead, and Christ will shine on you.'" So here it says, wake up. Expose it to the light, and it will be light. It will be transformed. And then it continues on, verse 15. "Look carefully then how you walk, not as unwise, but as wise, making the best use of the time, because the days are evil. Therefore do not be foolish, but understand what the will of the Lord is." And we could continue on and talk through a whole bunch of practical things as we go further. But it says, understand what the will of the Lord is. Be careful, because the days are evil. And so when you go out there, you might see things occasionally or all the time that you kind of think, man, this is evil. Does anybody have that experience? See stuff going out on the world, out there, different wars, different things happening, you think, this is evil. And we're encouraged. Be careful how you walk. Walk wisely, making best use of the time, because the days are evil. So we need to understand the will of God so that we can actually use our time well. We need to understand what He wants to do so that we can actually not waste the time that we have, especially when the world has so many different things going on, but actually do what the Lord is leading us to. And so this morning, if you've got a newsletter, does anybody have a newsletter with them? There was a verse on it. We're going to have a read of that. The verse, very well-known one from Matthew 28, the Great Commission. So we're going to have a read of Matthew 28, verse 19 through to 20. Here, Jesus is talking to His disciples. He's about to leave them, send down the Holy Spirit, and he's about to go and be seated on high next to the Father. And He says in verse 19, "Go therefore and make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father and of the Son and of the Holy Spirit, teaching them to observe all that I've commanded you. And behold, I am with you always to the end of the age." So He says, go and make disciples. And so we're going to have a little look this morning at that word disciple, what it means to follow Jesus' great commandment. What does it mean to go and make disciples? And it's really important, if we want to follow the will of Jesus, to know what He commanded us to do. And so what we're first going to look at is the word disciple. It should actually be synonymous with the word Christian. So Christian means disciple of Jesus. So somebody that's a Christian is a disciple of Jesus. And so we're going to read this in Acts 11, verse 26. At the end of it, there's just this little statement made in a whole bigger story. And the very end of it, if we read through, it says, "The disciples were first called Christians at Antioch." So this little thing, that the disciples, so the followers of Jesus, were first called Christians at Antioch. So the word Christian here means disciple of Jesus. So to be a Christian is to be a disciple of Jesus. To be a disciple of Jesus is to be a Christian. But you may know that some people claim Christianity and don't really follow Jesus. Has anybody seen that? That they identify as it, but they might not actually have any practice backing it up. But what we see is that they should mean the same thing. And, Jesus, he goes and He says to His disciples, come and follow me. Come and follow me. I want you to follow me. And so being a disciple is the same as a follower of Jesus. So we've got lots of different terms. We're followers of Jesus. Is that all right? This morning, are you a follower of Jesus? Yeah? Excellent. We are followers of Jesus as disciples. And so we want to have a look at the word disciple a little bit more and the connotations it brings. What's the other things that come with it? So if we have a look at that word disciple, we're going to have a look at a Greek word called mathetes. So this one, you might see the word math in there. Mathematics. Mathematics comes from the same word. And so mathetes is somebody that's a learner. So mathematics is somebody that learns about, how things work, maths. But mathetes is somebody that's a learner, a disciple, or a pupil. So somebody that follows a teacher, learns from a teacher. And if we have a look at the way the Jews understood this word, we can see lots of different people talk about the culture at the time, that this word, to be a disciple of somebody, was to learn everything from them. So you'd want to be a disciple of somebody, you would leave your home, where you'd grown up, you'd leave that behind, and you'd go and you'd live with them. They would supply you food and your board, and then you do all the odd jobs around the place, clean up the house, all of that. But you would learn from them. So if you were a disciple of a rabbi, you would follow that rabbi everywhere, and you would learn what they taught. You would follow them, you would learn from them, you would become like them. And the aim was so that you would also be able to teach others in that same school. That you'd be able to teach them what you would learn. And so this is in the understanding of the people at the time, that to be a disciple is about living with people and learning from people, coming alongside of so that you can teach on. So to be a disciple isn't this minor thing. It was about following Jesus. And so for us, if we want to be a disciple of Jesus, to be a disciple is a very active thing. To be a Christian needs to be an active thing for us. It's not just an identity, it's something we also do as we become like Jesus. We follow him. We follow what he does. We live with the teacher. We become like the teacher. So that word disciple, it can be used for all sorts of different things. So you could imagine somebody goes and learns a trade, learns to become a carpenter or a mechanic. They go and they learn as an apprentice from their teacher, don't they? Anybody here done a trade in their life? Yeah? Beautiful people? Yeah? So you go and you learn everything. And if you're a good apprentice, you learn quickly, right? If you're not so good an apprentice, you probably get hit over the head a few times by your boss. You guys ever experienced that? Yeah? Doug? Yep, you understand? So that's an apprentice. So that's like a disciple. Or a disciple could also be somebody that learns in philosophy. So you could go and learn from somebody. So maybe a modern day example is maybe you become a disciple of an eco-warrior and you go become an activist and you follow them everywhere and you learn what they do. So this whole thing of being a disciple is being a close follower. So being a disciple must be active. And so Jesus, he says a few things to do with this. We're going to look at John 12:26. Jesus talks a lot about being a disciple in his ministry. So in John 12:26 he says, "If anyone serves me, he must follow me. And where I am, there will my servant be also. If anyone serves me, the Father will honor him." So he's saying, if anybody's going to serve me, they must follow me. And if they're going to follow me, they're going to be where I am. If they're going to be with me, they're going to be with me. They're not going to be separate. They're not going to be somewhere else. They're going to be with the teacher. And so we want to cling close to Jesus. We want to be with him. And Luke 9:23, it says, he then said to the crowd, if any of you wants to be my follower, you must give up your own way, take up your cross daily, and follow me. And so he says there's a cost that we must follow Jesus. We've got to leave behind our own life so that we can take on the life of Jesus, so that we can follow him. And so what I'm making a point this morning of is that for us, being a Christian is not a passive thing. It's not just some minor thing. It's about following and being where Jesus is. That we want to be where Jesus is. And so my next point, I've just got a few points and then we're going to get into some other things this morning. But my next point is that, can we bring it up, Jamie? A disciple is a disciple maker. So one of the things that is really key to understanding what a disciple is somebody that's learning from the teacher so that they can actually pass it on. So a disciple has not become fully realized until they can actually teach somebody else in that same school. So for us, our role as followers of Jesus is actually to see other people heading towards Jesus, to lead people to Jesus. We want to see them become more like Jesus. We want to be like the Master, because the Master, that's what he did. He led people to himself. He led them to Jesus. And so to be a disciple is to be a disciple maker. And so I want to ask you this morning, here's a bit of a question, just as you evaluate your own life. This isn't meant to be judgmental, but it is a question we have to consider. In your life, who are you discipling? Can you identify somebody in your life that you are leading to Jesus? And so I was asked this question a little while back, and your initial thing is usually out of guilt, like, oh, nobody, I'm not doing anything. But then as you spend some time thinking, often a lot of examples come to mind. You go, oh, yeah, no, there are people I'm leading to Jesus. I'm leading people towards him. But it's a good thing for us to examine, who are we actually leading towards Jesus? Who are we saying, come follow me so that we can follow Jesus. Let's head towards him. And so this can be things like spiritual conversations with people. That, we go and read the Bible with somebody. Or we ask them, hey, what have you been reading lately? How has God been speaking to you? Having meaningful conversations. Not just being caught in all sorts of other stuff, but really being intentional. It could be having people over for dinner. You can say, hey, come over to my house, come have some food with us, and hanging out with people. Because that kind of relationship has to be through relationship. It's not like transactional. It's actually got to come through relationship. If we want to see people discipled to be like Jesus, it has to be around the dinner table. It has to be through things like that. And so it's really important that we do look at those who we can pass on to. And my last point, before we're going to get into some stats this morning, but my last point that I really want to press home is that to be a disciple maker, a disciple doesn't have to be a Christian. We can actually lead non-Christians to Jesus, right? So we can kind of think that, somebody has to be a Christian before we can start walking beside them in a way that they become like Jesus. But if we look at Jesus' disciples, those guys, they started following Jesus, but they didn't really know who he was beyond being a rabbi, beyond being a great teacher, until much later they came to realize that he was the Messiah. He was the one sent to save the world. So it took them a while to figure it out. They were following him for a while before they figured out who he was. And they followed him for at least 3 years until he died and rose, and the Holy Spirit came. And if you know the story of Peter, he was somebody that when Jesus died, when Jesus was taken captive to go and be crucified, Peter rejected. He said, I don't know who Jesus is. He tried to save his own skin. And it wasn't until later that the Holy Spirit came upon him and he became bold to preach for the Lord. And so what we see here is some people that start journeying with Jesus and then are filled with the Spirit after some time and are on fire for God. And so for us, we can actually be looking at people in our life that might not know Jesus, might not believe him, and think, how am I leading them towards him? How am I praying for them? How am I getting them over to my house? So here's one for you. If you've got some non-Christian friends, invite them over for dinner. And then invite some other couple from church to come over for dinner as well and hang out and see if you can talk about spiritual stuff. You might not get to. You might start off just really casual at first. So if you ever want to invite Jamie and I over, you get some friends coming over and you say, we just want them to be around other Christians. We want to make relationships with them. You're welcome to invite us as well. You could have a meal at people's house. But we should invite each other over and invite non-Christian friends in and talk with them. Go, hey, come over to our house. And we don't need to bash them over the head with the Bible straight away. We can start being relational because the whole disciple process comes out of relationship. And we want to be leading people towards Jesus, however many steps at a time that takes. And so I want to have a look at some stuff. We have coming up in a couple of weeks, we've got a week that we've put as Try Church. So we've made a little thing that says, why not try church this Sunday? And what we want to do as a church is invite people to come and join us in a way that's not really threatening, say, why don't you come and try it? And as we've been thinking about this, we had a look at some statistics. Because I don't know about you, but when I think about inviting people to church, my first thought is rejection. Is anybody like that? When you think about inviting someone to church, your first thought is, they won't want to come to church. I'm going to really have to twist their arm and make them come along. But I wanted to look at some stuff. So we're going to have a look at some stats from an organisation called McCrindle. And these are from 2022. They did a survey across a broad spectrum of people and just talked about all sorts of things to do with church, to do with spiritual life. And so there's a whole bunch of extra stuff, which we won't have time to go through. And so I've got some stuff printed out. You can download the PDF online if you want, which has even more. But after the service, you're welcome to have a look through this. But we're just going to look through some of it today. And we're going to have a look at what it might mean for us. So if we go to the first one. So here, they asked everyone what their religious identity was. So they asked them, what do you identify as? And so if you can see, we've got a few different things of the pie chart there. The red one is 33%. So 1 in 3 people said that they don't identify with any religion or spiritual belief. They say, I'm not religious at all, not spiritual. So that's 1/3 of people. 6% were part of other religions. 13% said they had spiritual beliefs but didn't identify with religion, so it's probably a lot of New Age kind of stuff. And then 46% said they were Christian. So if we look at the data from the Australian census and different things, that's what comes out every time they do it. You get a stat similar to that. But if you're talking with people and you're thinking about Australia, you don't really think that 1 in 2 people is Christian in Australia, do you? Not really. And that's because a lot of people identify as it, but have no relationship with Jesus. So when we look at the term disciple, a disciple is somebody that is closely with Jesus. They're with him. They're part of his church. They're coming along. So here we've got some other stats that kind of show a bit more. 16% of people go to church at least monthly. So 16% of Australians. So that's 3 out of 20 Australians go to church monthly. So people that have a relationship with Jesus. And then 6% are what are called active practices. So they're people that are extremely involved with Christianity, with church, with things like that. So that's probably a bit more of an accurate look at the numbers. But what that says to us is that there's a lot of people, 1 in 3 people in Australia that claims to be Christian and isn't in church, isn't going anywhere, isn't doing anything. They may not even have any religious or spiritual things going on in their home life. But what that means is that they're open to it, and so we can reach out to those people and say, hey, why don't you come to church? Why don't you get involved? You say you're a Christian, why don't you come along and see what it's about? Why don't you get involved with us? So it's not a terrible stat for us if we want to reach out. But we're going to go to the next one. So here shows a bit of a breakdown of the different generations. So we're going to have a look through the generations. Down the side, you've got the top one. The top row is Christianity. So these are people that claim their identity is Christian. The next one is people with spiritual beliefs with no major religion. The next one is people claiming no religion. And then the last one is other religions. But if we look at Gen Z, for this one, they surveyed people from 20 to 29. They say Gen Z is from about 15 up, but they did the survey of 20 to 29. So who here is from the age 15 through the age 29? Yeah? We've got a couple? Yep. So there's about 5 here. Who here is a millennial? So from 30 through to 44. Yeah. A couple? Yep. So millennial is roughly, I'm 30, so it's roughly my age, and Shavi's 45. So right up, Shavi just in the next one. So The next one, Gen X, is 45 through to 59. So who here is 45 through 59? Yep. And then Boomers are 60 through to 78. So who here is that one? Yep. Oh, nice vocal, nice job. And is anyone part of the Builders generation? So that's 79 plus. Yep. Nice. Excellent. So what you can see is that over time, people have identified less with being Christian. The stats kind of show people going to church has stayed the same the last 20, 30 years, but the number identifying as Christian has gone down. And one of the really interesting things to look at is millennials, so my age, is the lowest identifying as Christian. So you often think that young people are not interested in church. Has anybody thought that? Young people are not interested. But what we see is the next generation is interested. It's my generation that wasn't very interested, that have a lot of other things going on. So it's not as though young people don't want to be about, as something particular happened with my generation. But so they're quite interesting to look at. But we're going to continue on. So can we go to the next one? So they asked people what prompts them to think about spirituality and religion. So this is across everyone. And so if we start on the right, it said conversations with people. That were you prompted to think about religion or spirituality after a conversation with somebody? And what we see is that for Gen Z, for that young group, 36% of them, after a conversation with somebody, were prompted to go and think about it, think deeply about it. For baby boomers, only 20% were prompted to think about it afterwards. And then, so they just have a bit of that age range to see the difference in generations there. The next one was personal unhappiness. Has that caused you to think about spirituality in any way? And so for Generation Z, that's 33, and for baby boomers, that's 17. And then the last one, social media. Has this caused you to think about spiritual matters? And so for baby boomers, that's only 4%. So that's 4 in 100 social media caused them to think about it. Have any of you guys ever thought about spiritual stuff that are baby boomers off social media? No? Not really? For Gen Z, the youngest generation, 26%, 1 in 4 of the youngest generation thought about spiritual stuff after seeing something online. That's pretty crazy, isn't it? So for us, we should be engaging at least in some way online because that's the way the next generation is communicating. But let's go to the next one. It's a bit of a funny one. So they had a look at the top platforms that people were engaging on them. So Facebook was 28%, YouTube 27%, Instagram 23%, TikTok 20%. So as a church, we're on Facebook, YouTube, and Instagram. We just don't post very often. We don't really do too much on it. But the funny stat, I've always been opposed to TikTok. Who here is on TikTok? Couple? Not too many? I've always been fairly opposed to TikTok. I thought, I'll never ever. I'm too old for that. Anybody thought that? Too old for TikTok? Yeah, rightfully so. So I've always thought that, but they say that 46% of Gen Z, almost half, are engaging with TikTok at least weekly to help them in their spiritual life. Is that a crazy stat? What's on TikTok? A whole bunch of rubbish, maybe some good stuff. So maybe we should actually start a TikTok for church. Who are we going to volunteer for that? Lenore, you'll start our TikTok for us? But what's interesting out of that for us is we should know where people are going for their stuff and actually be involved in the marketplace talking about spiritual matters. Because we have the answer in Jesus. So we don't want to hide the answer somewhere where people aren't going. We want to take it where people are going. We want to take Jesus to those places. So that's just a bit funny. We'll keep moving on. So they were asked, how open would you be to a spiritual conversation that may involve different views to your own? So if you were to talk to somebody out there in the wild about spiritual matters, how open would they be to actually talking to you? And so almost half of Australians, 46%, are extremely or very open to being in a spiritual conversation that may involve different views. What have you thought that? Would have you thought that people are open to a spiritual conversation? For me, I've always defaulted to thinking of rejection, like, no, nobody really wants to hear it. I've got to do it really well, otherwise people are not going to hear it. I've got to work really hard and be really good at what I do, otherwise people are not going to want to hear it. But what we see is that half of Australians are actually very open, which means you don't actually have to do a good job about it. Hopefully you take it seriously, but we can sometimes think that's not my gift, or I'm not smart enough, I'm not skilled enough for it. But what we see is that a lot of Australians are actually very open to talking about spiritual matters. So if we look, 21% are not open at all. So 1 in 5 people will flat out reject you. Go, I don't want to talk about that. Who here knows a couple of those 1 in 5s? Yeah? But that's all right. We've got to be ready for rejection. But we shouldn't actually assume it, because even 8%, the next one, are slightly open, which means if you do a good job at it, you might actually get to talk about something important and spiritual with them. But what I want to encourage is that 4 out of 5 people are not actually looking to reject us straight away as we talk about spiritual matters with them. A lot of people are open to it. And so we actually need to stop being afraid to actually have genuine conversations with people about spiritual matters. Actually being brave to talk to people. Can we go to the next one? So one of the stats that kind of shows it a bit more is that younger Australians are more likely to be open to a conversation than older Australians. So for Gen Z, 53% were open to it, whereas for baby boomers, only 34% were open to it. So it roughly shows that the older somebody is, the less likely they're open to talking about spiritual matters. And I don't know whether that's a generational thing or whether that's a getting old thing. What do you guys reckon? Getting old. So I don't know. But what that says is that in your workplace, if there's somebody young there, you shouldn't assume that they're less interested. You should actually assume that they're more interested in talking about these kind of things than you are. So that's a really good stat for us to have a look at. We're going to press on. So people are asked, do you know somebody that is a Christian? Do you know anybody that's a Christian? And 11%, so 1 in 10 people said, I don't know a Christian at all. Now, who knows? Maybe they've got a friend that's a Christian and it's never come up in conversation. So that's not hard and fast that they're not connected with anybody. But they don't know about knowing a Christian. So that's 1 in 10 people doesn't know a Christian. And for Gen X, so that's 45 through to 60-year-olds, 1 in 6 people say they don't know a Christian in that generation. So who here was in Gen X, 45 to 60? So 1 in 6 of your peers say that they don't know a Christian. Roughly half of people say they know a lot of Christians. And then the other groups, we see different stuff. But about 1 in 4 people either know one Christian or no Christians. And so you should think of the people you know, 1 in 4 of them, either you are the only Christian they know, or they don't even know you're a Christian. And so for us, I want to press home the urgency for us that we don't actually leave things to other people. Think, I'm not good enough for this. There are better people that are better at speaking, people that know this stuff better, people that seem to be more spiritual. Because at the end of the day, a lot of people out there, you might be the only Christian that they know. You may be the only example of Jesus that they see that isn't profanity, that isn't something else. You may be the only contact with the Bible that they have is through you. And so I want to press on us the urgency that we are actually reaching out to people, that we don't go passive and go, oh, it's not my job, somebody else will do it. Because 1 in 4 people, it's you. And so that's a little bit of a sad thing, but we're going to move on to better stuff. So here, if you were personally invited by a friend or family member to attend a Christian church service or event, how likely is it that you would attend? So people are asked, if you were invited to church by somebody, would you go along? And so what we see here is 1 in 3 people said, no way, not going to church. Does that track with people? 1 in 3 people say, no way. But what we actually see is that 1 in 3 people is extremely likely or very likely to go to church if invited. So if you have 3 people you invite to church, the actual thing might not happen that way, but the stats say that if 3 people you invite to church, 1 of them will tell you no way, get lost. But 1 of them will be like, yeah, I'd love to come to church. And the middle one might not quite know. They might go, oh, I don't know, yeah, I'll come, and then not come along. But what it shows is that people are actually far more open to coming to church if we invite them. If through a personal connection we say, hey, you thought about trying church before? You want to come along, see my community, see what goes on? No judgment, just come along and see what happens. You don't have to come again afterwards. But people are actually very open to that. And so what I wanted to encourage us is we shouldn't start from a place of rejection when we think about inviting somebody. You know, we could very easily think they'll never want to do that. We should actually start from a more positive place and go, you know what, Jesus is the answer, and people actually have a need that they want filled. And so to go, hey, why not come to church this week with me? And you got to be ready. 1 in 3 people will tell you no. But 2 in 3 people might come along. Is that all right? Is that a good encouragement? Yeah? It might be a bit of a kick up the butt for us. I know it is for me. A bit of I need to be actually stepping forward a bit more. But it's good for us to do that, isn't it? And so we're looking at Try Church coming up. And so it's come out of thinking through this and praying about this. We've got a week where we wanted to make it really easy to invite people to church. To go, hey, why don't you come along this week? And so we got a whole bunch of flyers and things like that. We're actually going to be printing, we've got, I think, 7,500 flyers printing out. That'll be ready by the end of next week. And we've got a whole bunch of maps for our local area. And we're going to go around and put a flyer in everyone's mailbox. So who here is ready to do some walking? Yeah, a few people? Good. So we've got roughly 6,500 homes to put in. If you have a place that's 300 homes on a map, it roughly takes you an hour and a half by itself, roughly. So we've got quite a few hours. We roughly worked it out. If we had 21 people give an hour and a half, we would do it in an hour and a half. But what we're going to do, so not this week, but next Sunday, we're going to have them give out some packs, and people that are willing are going to go and do some. I'm really excited to do some walking and praying and putting things in mailboxes. But if we can get a few different people involved, we'll be able to leaflet drop our whole area to invite people along to church. It's really good as we go to pray for the places, to pray as we walk around our area that people might come to know Jesus. After the service, I'm going to throw this out the back. And so if you want to have a look through at your local area, maybe you live somewhere and you want to put them in the neighbours nearby, just write your name on the sheet if you would love to be involved. If you might want to be involved, write your name with a question mark. But they'll be out the back later. So is that all right? So that's for Try Church. I really wanted to encourage us about being disciple makers this morning. That, you know, we can be leading people towards Jesus before they believe in him. We can be talking to them about spiritual matters. We can be inviting them to church. We can be having conversations with them. What do you believe? Tell me about it. And they might come out with some very strange things. They might tell you all sorts. And it's just about listening to people and going, well, this is what I believe. And so it would be great for us to be open with people and to be expecting that people want to have conversations. Be ready for some rejection, but not expecting it. Is that all right? That's our encouragement this morning. And for us as a church, we're doing Try Church. One thing I really want to stress is we might have a lot of people that come to church as a result, and that would be amazing. We're hoping for that, we're praying for that. But at the end of the day, we want to be like Jesus. We want to do the things that Jesus did. And so for us, even if nobody comes, to be engaged in reaching out is to be like Jesus. So for us, it's the healthiest thing for us to do, to be serving Jesus. So regardless of the result, this is something we want to do as a church regularly because we want to do the things of Jesus. We want to be engaged in his mission.